He never imagined what he was about to uncover. Linda and her dog shared a secret that Carlos couldn't comprehend until the day he stumbled upon it. Carlos had always thought his life with Linda was perfect. Married for 6 years, they had everything: a house, stable jobs, and of course, her loyal golden retriever, Max. But there was something Carlos was unaware of. Something strange was unfolding in their home, something he could never have anticipated. Linda had always been a private person, and initially, Carlos thought nothing of the long hours she spent locked away in her room with Max. However, as time passed, he began to notice changes in her behavior. Linda became increasingly isolated, leaving her phone unattended, ignoring messages from friends, and most notably, Max never left her side. Whether she went to the kitchen or lay down, he was always there, like a shadow. It felt overly possessive, but Carlos tried to dismiss it, convincing himself he was merely becoming paranoid. Then one day, he returned home earlier than expected. It was a quiet late afternoon when Carlos opened the door and heard a sound coming from the bedroom. Without intending to, he pushed the door open and froze. Linda was lying on the bed, and what he saw was unbelievable. Max was beside her, licking her hand persistently, almost as if it were a ritual. The strangest part was Linda's expression. She lay there as if nothing else mattered, completely unfazed by Carlos's presence. When she noticed him in the doorway, she simply smiled and said, "He was just taking care of me. You know how he is." Stunned, Carlos didn't know how to react. He closed the door and walked away in silence, but that scene haunted him. In the days that followed, he tried to deny what he had witnessed, convincing himself it was nothing. Yet Max's behavior only intensified. He became more clingy, always by Linda's side, even when Carlos was home. Whenever Carlos spoke to Linda, Max would watch closely, and if Carlos tried to get closer, Max would position himself between them, his gaze fixed and intense. One night, during a quiet dinner, Carlos casually brought it up, joking that Max seemed overly attached to her. Linda laughed and replied, "He's always been like that. He's just protective." Carlos tried to brush it off, but unease settled in. Max was no longer just a pet. He was acting like a guardian, silently watching over Linda in a way that felt unsettling. Days passed, but the strange behavior persisted. Carlos noticed how Max followed Linda everywhere, even when she didn't want to go. If she went to the bathroom, he waited outside the door. If she sat on the couch, he was right there, watching her, waiting for something. Every time Carlos entered a room, Max would raise his head and watch him, as if silently warning him to stay away. Then one evening, Carlos came home early again, sensing something was wrong. The house was eerily quiet. Linda didn't greet him with her usual smile. He walked to the bedroom and heard soft panting and rhythmic licking. His heart raced as he quietly opened the door. Inside, Linda lay on the bed, and Max was there, his head resting on her stomach, licking her skin in slow, methodical motions. Linda didn't flinch or pull away. She simply stared at the ceiling, her expression neutral, as if everything was normal. Carlos's legs weakened. He couldn't move or speak, frozen in shock. What was happening? This wasn't mere affection. It was something deeper, more unsettling. Sensing his presence, Linda turned her head slowly, her voice calm. "Max has been protective of me. He's always known when I need him the most." Carlos couldn't respond. His thoughts were a jumble of confusion and horror. Instead, he stepped back slowly and closed the door, retreating to the living room, his mind spinning. The following days were tense. Carlos couldn't shake the image of what he'd seen. He tried to maintain his routine, but unease lingered like a dark cloud. He began avoiding Linda and Max, but they were always together. That weekend, Carlos decided to confront Linda for answers. He needed to understand what was happening. When they were alone, he asked her directly, "Linda, why is Max acting like this? Why is he so attached to you? It's not normal." Linda stared at him for a long moment, weighing whether to tell him the truth. Finally, she sighed and said, "Carlos, there's something you need to know. Something I've never told you." Carlos's heart raced. What was she about to reveal? "Max isn't just a dog," she continued, her voice low. "He's been with me longer than you know. Before we even met, he was different. He's always known when something was wrong with me. He's never left my side. And when I needed him the most, he was there not just as a pet, but as something protective." Carlos's confusion deepened. "Protective? What do you mean?" Linda took a deep breath. "I wasn't sure how to explain it, but Carlos, Max has a strange ability. He can sense things I don't even know about. It's like he knows when I'm in danger, when I'm sad, when something's wrong with me. And recently, he's been trying to protect me from something even bigger. Carlos felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean, something bigger? Linda hesitated before speaking again. I've been feeling different lately, more tired, more sick. And Max, he's been more clingy than usual. He's been licking that same spot on my stomach, right over my lower abdomen, because he knows something is wrong. Carlos was taken aback. What are you saying? Are you sick? Linda nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know what it is yet, but I've been to the doctor, and they found something, a growth, a tumor. I didn't want to worry you or cause a panic. But Max, he's been acting like he knows what's happening even before I did. Carlos was speechless. The weight of the revelation hit him like a truck. He had no idea that all this time, Max wasn't just being a strange, clingy dog. He had been acting as a warning, a guardian in his own right, alerting Linda to something much bigger than either of them could comprehend. Without another word, Carlos embraced Linda tightly, realizing that Max's behavior wasn't just that of a dog. It was the instinct of an animal trying to protect its owner from something it couldn't articulate. Now, they both had to face it together. But the real question was, would it be too late? The days that followed were filled with urgency and a strange stillness. Linda had begun her tests and scans, but the uncertainty loomed over them like a heavy fog. Max stayed glued to Linda's side, his eyes never leaving her. It was as if he knew time was running out and every moment was precious. Carlos could hardly believe how quickly everything had turned upside down. Just days before, he had been worried about Max's strange behavior, questioning whether Linda's attachment to the dog was excessive. Now he saw the bigger picture, one that terrified him. Max wasn't just a dog, he was her protector, her silent guardian. One evening, as they sat on the couch, Max curled up at Linda's feet. Carlos couldn't hold back any longer. Linda, we have to talk, he said, his voice shaky but firm. What if it's too late? What if we can't fix this? Linda looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. Carlos, it's not about fixing things anymore. It's about being here, being present. Max is helping me get through this. He's been with me through every hard moment of my life. Now he's showing me that we still have time. He's not giving up on me, and neither should we. Carlos felt a pang in his chest. He was terrified of losing her, terrified of the unknown. But looking at Linda's calm resolve and Max's unwavering presence beside her, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was just the beginning of a long journey, and they still had a chance to fight. The following week, Linda's surgery was scheduled. They chose the best hospital in town, known for its experienced surgeons. Max's behavior remained unchanged. He stayed by Linda's side every waking moment, even sleeping at the foot of her bed, watching over her like a sentinel. Carlos began to question everything he had believed about animals. He had always thought of Max as just a dog, loyal and affectionate, but ultimately just an animal. Now he wasn't so sure. Max's intuition and bond with Linda seemed to transcend what he had ever imagined possible. Was it really possible for a dog to sense something like this before any human could? The day of the surgery arrived. Linda was quiet that morning, determined yet anxious. Carlos held her hand tightly as they walked into the hospital, both weighed down by uncertainty. Max wasn't allowed to accompany them, but Linda's eyes kept drifting to the door, as if she expected him to be there, waiting to guide her through. As they entered the surgical ward, the doctors prepared Linda for surgery. Carlos stayed by her side, not letting go of her hand. The fear in his heart was suffocating. What if the doctors couldn't remove all of the tumor? What if it had already spread too far? After a long wait, the surgeon came out to speak with Carlos. The look on the doctor's face was hard to read. For a moment, Carlos's heart stopped. How did it go? He asked, his voice trembling. The doctor gave him a reassuring smile. The surgery went very well. We were able to remove the tumor completely, and the margins are clean. It hadn't spread to other organs. We're optimistic, but we'll continue with a course of treatments just to ensure everything is taken care of. Carlos let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Relief washed over him, but the weight of everything that had happened still felt heavy. He had almost lost Linda, but now there was hope. Later that evening, Linda woke up from the anesthesia. Her eyes fluttered open, and she smiled softly when she saw Carlos sitting beside her, holding her hand. "You're okay," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We're both okay," she replied, squeezing his hand gently. "I've never felt more alive, Carlos. I feel like I've been given a second chance." As Linda recovered, Max returned to his usual post by her side. He wasn't as frantic as before, but the way he stayed close and watched over her told Carlos everything he needed to know. This wasn't just an ordinary dog. Max was something else entirely. He was part of their family in a way Carlos had never fully understood until now. Life slowly began to return to normal. Linda's recovery was steady, and with each passing day, the bond between her and Max seemed to grow even stronger. Carlos, too, felt a change within himself. He started to see the world differently, appreciating every moment he had with Linda. The little things, the quiet dinners, the shared laughs, the touch of her hand, were no longer taken for granted. He had almost lost it all, but now he was determined to cherish it. It was then that Carlos realized the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the things we don't understand, like the way an animal behaves or the way someone loves us, are the very things that can save us. Max had been the unlikeliest of heroes, but in the end, he had given them the greatest gift of all time. In the days that followed, Carlos shared his newfound understanding with others. He talked to friends, strangers, anyone who would listen. He told them about Linda, the surgery, Max, and how an animal's instinct could sometimes be the most powerful force in our lives. As for Max, he continued to stay close, ever vigilant, ever loving. But now there was peace in the home, peace that had been earned through struggle, fear, and an unspoken bond that transcended words. One evening, as they sat together in the living room with Max at their feet, Linda turned to Carlos and asked, "Do you think he knew all along?" Carlos smiled softly, looking at Max with new eyes. "I think he did. He's been protecting you all this time. He always knew." Max, as if on cue, raised his head and looked at them, his eyes full of understanding. He had done his job, he had saved her, and now everything was going to be okay. As the days passed, Linda's recovery became a symbol of strength, not just for her, but for Carlos as well. He started to realize that his initial doubts about Max's behavior had been misguided. The bond between them, Linda, Max, and himself, was stronger than ever. It wasn't just about a dog and his owner anymore. It was about a family, a team, fighting together against all odds. One afternoon, as Carlos sat at his desk staring out the window, his thoughts wandered back to the time before everything happened, the normal days when he and Linda lived in what he now saw as naive peace. But now everything had changed. It wasn't just Linda's health that had shifted. It was their entire perspective on life, love, and loyalty. And then there was Max, the once ordinary dog who had become extraordinary in his eyes. Carlos thought about how if he hadn't listened to his instincts, if he hadn't trusted Max's behavior as a warning, he could have lost Linda forever. He would have never known what was happening until it was too late. Max had saved her in a way no one else could have. It was a bright Saturday morning when Carlos decided to do something he hadn't done in a long time: take Max for a walk, just the two of them. Linda was still resting, and he wanted some time to think, to bond with the dog who had, in a sense, brought their family back from the edge. The park was quiet, the air crisp and fresh. Max trotted alongside him, his leash in Carlos's hand. They walked in silence, the only sound being the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. Carlos couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened: the discovery of Linda's illness, the struggle, the pain, but also the moments of hope where everything seemed to fall into place. Max stopped abruptly, sniffing the air, more alert than usual. His ears perked up. Carlos looked down at him, confused, then glanced around. The park was peaceful, with only a few joggers in the distance, but Max was on edge. Carlos's heart skipped a beat. It was as if Max was sensing something again, something beyond the ordinary. "What is it, boy?" Carlos asked softly, bending down to pet him. Max looked up with wise, knowing eyes, then turned his attention toward the far end of the park, where a few people were gathering. Following his gaze, Carlos saw nothing unusual, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Max was trying to tell him something. Suddenly, Max tugged at the leash, pulling Carlos toward the crowd. Carlos hesitated, but then followed, curiosity piqued. As they neared, he saw what had caught Max's attention: a small boy, no older than 5, sitting on the grass, crying. Carlos approached slowly, his heart softening at the sight of the distressed child. Max, however, had already made his way over, sitting beside the boy as if to comfort him. The boy looked up, surprised, then wrapped his arms around Max, burying his face in the dog's fur. Carlos watched, astonished. Max had done it again. He had sensed a need before Carlos even understood it. The boy's tears slowly stopped, and a small smile began to form on his face as he held the dog close. Carlos knelt beside them, offering a gentle smile to the boy's parents, who had been watching anxiously from a distance. The father stepped forward, grateful. "Thank you. He's been so upset. He lost his favorite toy, but it looks like Max knew exactly how to help him." Carlos smiled, looking down at Max, who now had his head resting on the boy's lap. "I think he's always known," he replied quietly. It hit him then. Max wasn't just a protector for Linda. He was a protector for anyone who needed him. His instincts went beyond the walls of their home. Max had a gift, one that was rare and precious. That afternoon, as Carlos and Max returned home, Carlos couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. Max's behavior, his uncanny ability to sense the emotional needs of others, seemed to confirm everything he had been questioning about his loyalty and love. Max wasn't just an ordinary dog, he was a guardian, a healer, a silent protector. As they walked through the door, Linda was sitting on the couch, a soft smile on her face. She looked up and asked, "How was the walk?" Carlos sat down beside her, a thoughtful look on his face. "It was different. I think I finally understand. Max isn't just a dog. He's been more than that all along. He's been watching over us. He saved you, Linda. He saved us." Linda looked at Max, who was lying on the floor at their feet, content and calm. "I know. He's always known. He's been with me through everything." Max looked up at her with a gentle gaze, as if acknowledging her words. His tail thumped softly against the floor, and Carlos and Linda exchanged a look. In that moment, they all understood something deeply unspoken. The next few weeks were a time of healing for their family. Linda continued her recovery, and Max stayed by her side, ever faithful. Carlos had come to accept that their family had been given a second chance, not just because of Linda's strength, but because of the incredible bond they shared with Max. As they sat together that evening, Linda leaned her head on Carlos's shoulder, Max resting his head on her lap. They were a family, whole again, brought together by something neither time nor distance could break. The love and loyalty they shared were unshakable. And in that moment, they knew that no matter what life had in store, they would face it together, stronger than ever. What about you? Do you have a pet who has shown you unexpected loyalty or love? Share your story with us in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to share it with someone who might need a reminder of how powerful the bond between humans and animals can be. As the weeks went by, things seemed to settle into a new rhythm. Linda's health was improving steadily, and the air in their home felt lighter. Carlos, now more attuned to the subtleties of their lives, began to cherish the small moments when Max nudged him for attention or when Linda's laughter filled the room once again. Life was returning to something resembling normal, but there was one thing that kept nagging at Carlos, something he couldn't quite shake off. It was one quiet evening, a few months after Linda's surgery, when Carlos decided to revisit something he hadn't thought about in a while: the strange connection between Linda and Max. He had watched them both closely these past months, but something still felt unfinished, as if there was a thread left untied. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Carlos asked, "Linda, have you ever wondered why Max behaves the way he does? I mean, he's always been so connected to you. Do you think it's just instinct, or is there something more?" Linda turned to him with a thoughtful expression, then glanced at Max, who was lying peacefully by her feet. "I think it's more than instinct. Max has always been more than just a dog to me. From the moment I met him, I knew there was something special about him. Maybe he just understands me better than anyone else." Carlos looked at Max, who was now staring back at him, his golden eyes intense and almost wise. "You think he could really understand everything? Like everything that's happened?" Linda nodded slowly. "I think he's always known, Carlos. He's been here with me through some of the hardest times of my life. Before I even realized I needed him, he was there. And I think he knew long before I did that something was wrong." Carlos let out a breath, his mind racing. But why didn't he show me any of this earlier? Why was it so obvious to him and not to me? Linda smiled gently, her eyes soft. "Max doesn't need words. He's always communicated with us in a different way. And maybe, Carlos, you just needed to be ready to see it. He was showing you, but you were too focused on what you thought was normal. Sometimes we need to open our hearts to things we don't fully understand." Carlos sat there, taking in her words. He hadn't been ready to understand. He hadn't been willing to open himself to the possibility that Max's presence, his devotion, and his strange behavior were more than just a pet's attachment. It was a deep, unspoken understanding. Max had been more than a pet. He had been a guide, a silent protector, long before Linda's illness even emerged. As the night wore on, Carlos felt a shift inside himself. The questions that had haunted him for so long began to settle. Maybe he hadn't been the one to notice Max's behavior at first, but he had learned. He had learned to see beyond the surface, to embrace the unspoken bond between Linda, Max, and himself. A few days later, Carlos decided to take Max for a walk in the park again. This time, he was no longer filled with confusion or doubt. He simply wanted to be with the dog that had saved his wife, that had brought their family back together. As they walked through the park, Carlos looked down at Max, who trotted beside him with a steady pace, as if he had all the time in the world. He no longer felt like an outsider in his own home. He understood at last that Max was not just a part of their family. He was the heart of it. As they walked side by side, Carlos made a silent promise to Max, to Linda, and to himself to never again take for granted the love and loyalty they shared. But just as they neared the end of their walk, something caught Max's attention again. His ears perked, his eyes sharpened, and without hesitation, he tugged at the leash, pulling Carlos toward a nearby bench where an elderly woman sat, her face creased with worry. Carlos hesitated, looking at Max's intense gaze, then turned his attention to the woman. She seemed anxious, glancing around as though she were waiting for someone. Something in her posture told him she was alone, lost in her own thoughts. Without thinking, Carlos walked up to her with Max trotting alongside him. "Excuse me," Carlos said gently. "Are you okay?" The woman looked up, startled at first, but then relaxed upon seeing them. She smiled faintly. "Oh, I'm fine, thank you. Just waiting for my son. He's late, and I don't like sitting alone, but it's silly, really." Carlos smiled warmly, nodding in understanding. It's never silly to want company. Max, who had been sitting quietly beside the woman, suddenly leaned in and nudged her hand with his nose. The woman's eyes widened as she looked at the dog, then back at Carlos. "That's strange," she said softly. "He reminds me of a dog I once had. He used to do that when I was feeling lonely." Carlos was taken aback. Could Max be sensing the woman's loneliness? Could he be offering comfort just as he had done for Linda? The woman smiled down at Max, her expression softening. "Thank you for bringing him over. I think I needed this more than I realized." Carlos stood there, looking at Max, who now had his head resting gently on the woman's lap, completely at ease. It was as if Max had known, as if he had been drawn to the woman's need for companionship. And Carlos realized once again that Max had a gift that went beyond anything he could understand. As they said their goodbyes and left the park, Carlos couldn't shake the feeling that Max had somehow known this woman needed him, even before she did. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was Max's intuition, his gift to connect with those who needed help the most. When they returned home, Carlos sat with Linda, telling her about the encounter with the woman in the park. She listened intently, a soft smile on her face as she stroked Max's fur. "I think Max knows, Carlos. He always knows when someone is in need of comfort, even if they don't realize it themselves." Carlos nodded, finally understanding. "I think you're right. He's not just our dog. He's a healer, a protector, and we're lucky to have him." That night, as they all settled in, Max curled up at Linda's feet once more. This time, Carlos didn't feel any fear or doubt. He felt at peace, knowing that their family was complete, not just because of the love they shared, but because of the bond they had with Max, a dog who had taught them all the most valuable lesson of all, the power of love, loyalty, and trust. Do you have a pet who's shown you something incredible, something that made you believe they understand you in ways you didn't think possible? Share your story in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to share it with a friend who could use a reminder of the incredible power of animals in our lives. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet, join our family here at Story Prime for more amazing and heartwarming stories. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the smallest creatures can teach us the biggest lessons.